So last week we heard that the Four Samgrahavastus are the means of unifying a Sangha. They're four particular approaches that we can all practice individually and collectively to build and maintain a happy, healthy Sangha. And these four I'm going to have to look at it in order to say it right. Samgrahavastus are dana or generosity, priyavadita or kindly speech, artacharya or beneficial activity. Beneficial activity means doing what helps people to grow and develop. And then sammanarthata or exemplification, which is being a role model for each other in a simplified form. So something I've been thinking about this week is that we aren't saying that we should only practice these four activities within the Sangha in a sort of exclusive way. So I'll talk kindly to people in the Sangha, but it doesn't matter how I talk to anyone else. Of course, we're not saying that. But what we're saying is that these four methods, these four activities are what enable a happy, healthy Sangha that will help us all individually to grow and become more content, more kind, and more wise. Of course, the Sangha is also a great place to practice, to try out and experiment with being more generous, talking in a more kindly way, so that we eventually do that quite naturally. Yeah. So let's just remind ourselves a little bit about dana or generosity. So dana or generosity is based on metta. Giving arises from a really deep sense of fullness, not out of any sense of we should give. Yeah? Bhante described generosity as a form of communication of our affection for or appreciation of someone, or even our gratitude towards someone. We had last week the opportunity to reflect on our sweet spot of our own capacity to give. And what we meant by the sweet spot was, how far can you go in terms of generosity? How far can we go? Who are we willing to give to? And who are we not willing to give to? Because that's interesting information. It tells us about ourselves and our worldview. So yeah, please do share in the chat box if you've been having a go at pushing the limits of your sweet spot, even just a tiny bit. Okay, let's have a look then now at kindly speech. So we'll be looking at kindly speech. I'm just having a look at my timetable. Yeah, we'll be looking at this until about 7:35. Okay, so priya vardita, two parts to this word. Priya, P-R-I-Y-A, means kindly, affectionate, pleasing, or pleasant. And vardita means speech, and it comes from the word vacha. So priyavadita is an expression of our affection for others. So it's a bit like dana, isn't it? In dana we're giving, And Priyavadita, it's we're talking on the basis of our affection for others. We're letting people know that we like them, that we appreciate their qualities, we appreciate their skills, we appreciate their practice in some way or other. And this includes the practice of rejoicing in merits, which I'm sure many of you have experienced. We're going to come back to that later. And what we do in rejoicing in merits, it is a very deliberate way of sharing our awareness of and our appreciation of someone else and aspects and qualities they have. Priyavadita doesn't necessarily mean addressing everyone as dear or darling. But there's nothing to stop you doing that, yeah? Nothing to stop you at all doing that. It's just that Priyavadita is more than that. It's deeper than this, yeah? Sangharachita said in a seminar on the Great Chapter that kindly speech is based on metta. There is an intention to be helpful and to speak the truth. So it's based on metta, and there's an intention to be helpful and to speak the truth. And it's being aware of the other person and wishing to meet their needs. Metta, intention to be helpful, speaking the truth, being aware of them, and wishing to meet their needs. So it has the other person's best interests at heart. It's based on loving kindness, isn't it? When we talk to a friend, yes, so just something that occurred to me later this afternoon when I was finishing this talk is, you know, we're talking here about when we talk directly to a friend or someone in the Sangha, but we're also referring to when we talk to a friend about a third party. Yeah. So how do we get on when we do that? Yeah. That's just a little question for myself and perhaps for all of us. So Priyavadita implies that we're aware of the other person and that we're also aware of our own mental state and our own emotional state as well. And we're aware of our intention towards the other person as well. Do we really want to help them? Or are we trying to get something off our mind? Yeah. So right now in lockdown, so since we're sort of in a variation of lockdown, aren't we? And some of us are more isolated than others and will need to be for some time. Many of us are in our own spaces, our own space. What is it that folk need to hear right now? What about any of those people who are shielding? What do they need to hear? Well, I suspect that many people will benefit from a simple, kindly voice and to know that they are being thought about, remembered. So I just want to encourage us all to think about that and to just remember imaginatively that there are people out there who might be very lonely, and it only takes a text to say, how you doing? So I think there's some challenges in this. I'm sure maybe you don't, maybe you've got this sussed, but I haven't. So we've already heard that Priyavadita is speech that's kindly, that's intended to be helpful, that also tells the truth. So what the Buddha said in a sutta on the exposition of non-conflict in the Majjhima Nikaya is that the most skillful speech, the most skilled speech is true, correct, helpful, and timely, all at the same time. True, correct, helpful, and timely. In addition, the Buddha said that if speech is all of these, it can also sometimes be sharp, as in a bit direct and strong, perhaps giving someone some feedback, whatever that word means. Yeah, but unless it is true and correct and helpful and timely, it will could potentially be unhelpful. So speech doesn't have to be pleasant always. It doesn't have to be easy to hear. Yeah. So I'm remembering a time when a friend shared with me how painful they found it that I hadn't responded empathically to an email they'd sent me about their concern about a grandparent. My response had been short and factual, and I had been busy. And I'm not saying that as an excuse, I'm just remembering the context. But actually it was a habitual pattern, responding quickly in the moment to what sometimes had felt like another job. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that. Yeah, that you've got a lot on, you get a message from someone and you want to respond, so you just do it straight away to get it off the list. Anyway, it wasn't a kind thing to do, and it was really, really unpleasant to receive that feedback about how my text had landed. And actually, I'm so glad, because that actually really made me think I'm going to have to change this habit of being too busy. By the way, I've had that feedback from other people too, and I keep working on it. So how do we speak with kindness while also telling the truth, especially if that truth is difficult or negative or critical in some way? How do we do that? And I think it's a really, really challenging thing. In fact, I think the speech precepts and the Buddha's advice about what makes skillful speech is a tall order. I think it's a sophisticated skill set, if you want to use professional terminology. Yeah. And something that I've been reflecting on is, as we know, friendship was said by the Buddha to be the whole of the spiritual life. So friendship can take us all the way to enlightenment as part of a package. Yeah. And that being the case, since much of what we do with our spiritual friends is communicate, then it seems to me that communication is a major aspect of the whole of the spiritual life. And there are 4 speech precepts. 4, just about speech, because it's such a crucial area of ethics. This is why the Sangha matters so much. We're going to change more through our relationships and our interconnections and our interrelating with others than if we're just by ourselves. Yeah. Because being around others, we get mirrored back. Yeah. I think speech and communication in general, all forms of communication, is something that I've been working on for years and years and years, maybe 30 years. And certainly it's been my experience that speech can take us a very long way. and help us grow and develop. You know, it requires us to be aware of ourselves, aware of other people, aware of what will help them most, aware of our intentions to help them, as well as the most effective time for talking to them. And we might not want to be patient and wait till the right time. So we've got to work with our own patience and impatience too. Well, Sandeep, I think we're probably ready for our breakout groups. So I'd like us to have a go at going into groups of 3. Somebody might be in a group of 4. And Sandeep will send you a little message with what the questions are. But here, this is what they are, okay? The first question is, what does kindly speech look and sound like to you? The second question is, what supports you to talk in a kindly way? And the third question is, what gets in the way of you talking in a kindly way? So I thought I'd just pick up a few challenges now, perhaps, and suggest some ideas I've had that in ways that we can respond creatively to this vast area of Priyavadita. I've got enough material for a week's retreat, so it's very hard to know what bits to pick, but I'll do my best. So I think the first thing is to begin with what we know we already can do well. It's a really good idea to begin with our strengths. Yeah, to begin with strengths. If we begin with strengths, that can give us confidence to develop further. And, you know, being aware of the conditions we need that support and help us to communicate. So most of us will be much more able to communicate kindly when we're not stressed and when we're not tired. Yeah. So if that's the case, then what do we do to help ourselves not get overtired and not get stressed? Yeah. So that's certainly for me the case. If I get very tired, I get irritable, as my friends unfortunately know. Yeah. So the second thing I want to look at is just to ask us about how clear are we about our intentions for when we want to talk with a friend, particularly perhaps when we want to share something that might be difficult to say. So we might, you know, I think the starting point is, can we be really honest with ourselves? So we might have a sense that it would be good for them to know, for example, that they talk too much or they don't talk enough. Yeah. It'll help them to grow. Yeah. But yeah, so we might have a sense it's good for them, that it'll help them to grow. But is there anything else there in our intention? Are we at all irritated or frustrated? And it's not that we shouldn't be any of those things. It's just that it's about being really honest about how we are. And we've had this expression in Sri Ratna for a very long time, since the early days of FWBO, which is that honest collision is better than dishonest collusion. So we won't always get it right. So we might want to say something uncomfortable to a friend. And we might not say anything because we're so frightened of not being nice and not upsetting them. Fair enough. It's good to think, how can I do this as well as I can? But we might avoid saying something, and that might get in the way of us and our friend. However, there can be a cost of doing an awful lot or too much honest collision. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I think the other thing about intentions, in my own experience, is our intentions are often mixed. So until we're enlightened, probably our intentions are going to be a bit mixed. So we may well mostly want the person to be free of a habit that we can see limits them. Yeah. So for example, I know that I can jump to conclusions ever so quickly about somebody. I can. Got quite a quick mind. These days, I hope I don't always open my mouth, but sometimes I do. Yeah. Yeah, so if somebody lets me know that, I know they're on the right track. Anyway, the people who know me on this screen are smiling at me now. I think the other thing is, how well do we know the other person? And Karen Atara mentioned this as she was feeding back from her group. Yeah, how well do we know the other person? Do we really see them as a human being? What is going on for them? What is their life like? And what have they come from? What's their conditioning? What's their background, their life experience? Because all of those things impact why we are how we are. And, if we can just learn about people and be more curious, that can help. I think the other thing is that people have different personalities to us. And on the basis of that, they will experience communication differently. And that's something that we can find out about, and explore with somebody. Let's not assume that everybody sees the world in exactly the same way that we do. That's probably the thing to take away. So can we be really curious about other people? Can we look and listen, deeply listen to the person? Can we be really curious about who they are and what they're really like, rather than what perhaps we think they're like superficially? I think if we then combine that with being aware of any habitual tendencies we might have. So, for example, do we tend to see people's faults, to judge, to criticize others and their actions, or perhaps to do that to ourselves? Yeah. So I can relate to that. So, I get irritated if someone I'm with isn't very organised and doesn't stick to a plan. I've had to learn to be less concerned about sticking to a plan. Yeah, it's not easy, because it means you have to sit with a certain amount of unknownness. Yeah, and other people I can see are smiling about that one. Yeah. Do you know what? The whole world is not running to a plan. That was a bit of a surprise to me, that one. And another habit I think that influences how we're able to communicate with others is, do we tend to blame ourselves for things going awry, or do we tend to blame others? Or do we tend to blame politics? Or do we tend to blame other types of people? Yeah. So my habit is to blame myself. I tend to be overly responsible. It's not helpful, because it's like it implies I'm the center of the universe, and I'm not, because probably we all think we're the center of the universe in some way or other. And another aspect of that is, do we tend to take things horribly personally? Yeah. And it's just worth asking ourselves these questions, not to give ourselves a hard time. Because all these responses tell us about our minds. And that's the thing we can work on. That is the thing that we have got control over. We haven't got control over someone else following a plan or not, but we have got control, once we become aware of it, of our minds. And we can reflect on our conditioning. Another facet of this is, are we aware of any biases that we have? And we all have them. It's just part of who we are. And we have in particular biases that we might be unconscious of. that might influence our responses to people who are different to us. So I'm going to be very honest here and say, you know, I think an area I've had biases in, and some of them have been unconscious, is in around people who voted Brexit. I've decided in me that people who voted Brexit are like this, and I'm definitely not like that. I am the opposite. So then what I've done is I've polarized. I've taken up a position, and assumed that I'm always like that, and the person who, everybody, by the way, who voted Brexit is like that, and that's polarization. So how do we communicate in a kindly way when we're polarizing with people who are different to us? And there are plenty of people who are different to us in our Sangha. We aren't all exactly the same. We don't even have the same political persuasions in the Sangha. So I can, I tend to be a bit left wing, a bit middle class, has a look at things from a feminist perspective. Well, not everybody does. Not everybody does. So what do we do in that situation? Do we take up a position, or are we able to be curious and find out about, move towards, investigate who they are and why they did what they did, like why did they vote for Brexit? It's not easy. But Parami, who I'm sure some of you have heard of, she's a very experienced, very senior member of our order. She's been giving really good talks during Buddhist Action Month. And she talks about one of the greatest dangers in the world today is the tyranny of polarization. Polarization causes wars. At a less extreme level, it causes enormous amounts of disharmony when we take up a position against someone who's different to us. Other people are always a mirror into our own minds. And Priyavadita is an opportunity, like Dana, to go beyond our limited, self-centered, self-centric view of the world. It's an opportunity to deeply imagine and empathize with what the world looks like to another person. And as I've already said, this is why the Sangha is so essential to us. It's why friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. We will grow most effectively through our relationships and our interactions with other people, especially with people who are different to us. And I think I'll just add into that I'm sure we've noticed that the pandemic situation is having an impact on everybody's minds. Many people, in my experience, are not at their best. A lot of people are frightened or nervous or a bit anxious. Maybe you know what I mean personally, about the situation we find ourselves in personally or globally or in whatever way. And when we're anxious or nervous, we've got adrenaline in our bodies, and adrenaline makes us defensive and a bit threatened. And when we're a bit threatened, we're not exactly wanting to move towards people. So let's take that into account. And maybe if someone's a bit short with us, even in the Sangha, we give them the benefit of the doubt because they're not at their best. Okay. I think the other thing to remember at this point is that Priyavadita is a practice. It's a precept. It's a training principle. That means we get better and better at it if we try it out. It's not a commandment. In remembering that ethics in Buddhism, they're all training principles. And the language of skillful means we develop a skill in it over years. So, something I've noticed people really, really benefit from, and I've noticed and I've benefited from myself, is a lot of encouragement. I've noticed that a lot of people, especially in the West, lack confidence, especially in themselves, and even more especially in themselves as spiritual beings. So let's encourage. Let's reflect back to people how we see them growing and changing. Let's look for and point out what they do well. And let's share with them what specifically we appreciate about them and their qualities. So let's rejoice in each other's merits a lot. And when someone rejoices in our merits, let's listen and let's take it in and reflect on it so that it has a chance to go into the long-term memory. So what's your experience of practicing and participating in a rejoicing in merit? For example, in a Mitra ceremony or a KM ceremony or a send-off to get ordained, yeah, for somebody. What's it like? Yeah. So right now, I'm just going to rejoice in Sundeep. She doesn't know. So Sundeep, I'm going to rejoice in you. So I want to rejoice in Sundeep, who's a very bright woman. She's a fantastic techie skilled person. She works extremely hard, long hours for this Buddhist centre. She hasn't been furloughed, so she's picking up a lot. She's a clear thinker. She's absolutely devoted to the three jewels, and especially to understanding and applying the Dharma in her life and to changing her mind. And she's a loyal and kind friend. Yeah, and she's very dear to me. So just noticing yourself right now, what it's like when you hear a rejoicing.
It's there is on a surface level a little bit of embarrassment because I think we're just not used to it. But since working in the team, we do it really well in the centre team.
Yeah.
There's actually a really, it's just a lovely quality of opening, isn't there? It's just really connecting and yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be appreciated.
Yeah, great. I'm really glad. So what did anybody else notice? What happened to you when you heard that rejoicing? Shakidata and then Sila Bodhi.
I immediately wanted to do it myself.
Yes.
Yeah. And thought of lots of other, you know, like when I was sitting talking to Paul, actually, I really wanted to rejoice in his merits. He was doing some very good things. Yeah, it's catching.
Yeah, great. Sila Bodhi.
Yeah, I mean, it's uplifting to oneself as well. I felt joyful that you were rejoicing in Sundeep, who also is someone I could rejoice in a lot and have recently because it was her birthday recently. But it's also just opens you up. So immediately what it did is that, so there's already a connection between me and you because you're the person leading the class. And immediately I connected strongly to Sundeep because you were opening it all up, really.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Robin, you've unmuted yourself. Did you want to add something?
It was pretty much what Sheila Bodie was saying, but I wanted to join in. I wanted to reinforce what you were saying. Yeah. And I really felt it. I felt delight. Yeah.
So this is why rejoicing in merit is a Samgrahavastus. Okay, we've just experienced why, and it's not always easy, because it's not easy to receive it, especially it seems in the UK. Yeah, it's a bit odd, but there we are. We've got a bit of learning to do as a nation about rejoicing and taking in appreciation. And I think it's a practice as much as giving rejoicing in merits. So I just, I want to read a quote from Banti about kindly speech. I really like this reading. Banti says, kindly speech is like the warm rays of the rising sun that cause leaves to expand and flowers to open. People often do not realize how positive an effect can be produced by a few friendly words. Affectionate speech should be habitual to us, not just something we keep for use in emergencies, or for special occasions, or special people. Let's rejoice in one another again and again. Just make sure it's authentic and based on something you've really seen. Yeah. So I'm just going to, what we're going to do now, there's a lot more I could say. Okay, Sheila Bodhi, there's another series of talks here. Okay. I just wanted to just drop in 2 thoughts for you to take away about truth. So I just want us to just bear in mind, so when we're talking about situations or someone, how well do we check our facts and the sources of our facts? I've been thinking a lot about this recently because there is so much false news or biased news, depending on who wrote it. Yeah, the political bias of the newspaper, the Facebook page, you name it. So, you know, let's just make sure we investigate our sources and we think things through for ourselves as best we can. It's not an easy thing to do. Certainly my biases are influenced by my left-wing, feminist, baby boomer, middle class perspective. They are. And all these factors are at play, you know. Secondly, I want to just ask ourselves how we really look at the truth when we're in a situation where we're judging or blaming ourselves or others. So, you know, is it ever helpful to judge and blame ourselves and others for something that has gone wrong or we don't like? I haven't got the answer. For me, it's still a question. I'm living the question. Is it ever helpful to judge or blame ourselves or others? And I'd like to refer you to the work of Marshall Rosenberg, who invented nonviolent communication, or NVC. So a little challenge for the week is I'd like to encourage us all to rejoice in the merits or appreciate 2 people in the next week. So if you already do it, it's an additional 2 people. And if you don't do it, it's 2 people. And it would be great if one of them was in the Sangha, but it's not essential. Okay? Let them know what you appreciate about them. And what I find is it's addictive. The more you do it, the more hooked you get on doing it, and the easier it becomes to go around and rejoicing in people authentically and truthfully. And tomorrow morning, our Sangha retreat begins at 10 o'clock with a meditation led by Mahashraddha. And I hope I'll see you there. And next week, we will be looking at beneficial activity, which is the activities that help people to grow and develop. Okay, so thank you very, very much for a really nice evening. Great to see you all.